now we're going to have a conversation about AI-powered storytelling. And I just want you to know, we have a poet in the house, okay? We have several different types of storytellers in the house, oral story. Oh, we just got the good stuff in the house. Starting with Mallory Erickson, who is an executive coach, fundraising consultant, and podcast host for What the Fundraising. She is dedicated to transforming how nonprofit leaders approach their roles and fundraising effort. And I told anybody, if I had a Mallory when I was starting out, I might not have flipped a table or two, okay? With her signature framework, the Power Partners Formula, Mallory equips nonprofits with unique tools that they need to secure funding from foundations, corporations, and individuals. By October 23, she had trained over 60,000 fundraisers with elements of her innovative win-win framework, blending executive coaching, science-backed behavior design, and strategic fundraising practices. And now, with her book that dropped today, woo! What the Fundraising, Embracing and Enabling the People Behind the Purpose, released on Amazon and everywhere your independent booksellers sell your books. It delves into the history of the nonprofit sector, highlighting how a baked-in scarcity mindset has led to transactional fundraising practices that are draining for fundraisers and uncomfortable for donors. Mallory identifies strategies to shift away from these detrimental approaches, emphasizing that wellness, y'all know how I feel about wellness, y'all. Wellness of fundraisers is crucial to achieving better fundraising results. So if you're ready to feel empowered, clear, and excited about your next step in fundraising, come on, Mallory. Woo! Look, I like that. I just want to be my coach. Now, Torin, in 2020, first of all, Torin downloaded. He decided, okay, well, here we are in the pandemic. I guess I'm going to try something different. So he downloads Photoshop for the first time. Now, he works for the company that created it. Hello? Come on, talk about serendipity. And helping as many people as possible learn how to develop and build fulfilling careers. And Dmitry is an entrepreneur and technologist at the intersection of innovation, impact, and storytelling. Come on, Triple Threat. He is the founder and CEO of Arbor, an AI-powered platform that helps nonprofits tell authentic impact stories through video to support fundraising efforts. And as the co-founder and CTO of Alice, a leading hospitality platform, Dmitry has a track record of scaling successful tech ventures. He's also a mentor to emerging founders through the Startup Leadership Program. And Danny helps our generative AI efforts over at Canva, but is also deeply motivated by and works on the strategy for the Canva Foundation. So I want to bring these four powerhouses to the stage so that we can learn how AI-powered storytelling elevates nonprofit narratives with visual media. Come on, my friends.
Okay, Kishana, can we just give it up for Kish in the chat? Like, holy moly. You know, when you are running one of these events, like well, actually for me, it's pretty easy to know who should lead these rooms, but I am bowing down to her. I was saying in the green room, I've learned the most about facilitation, holding space, speaking from this woman right here. So Kish, so honored. Thank you for bringing us all up. And I know we were running a few minutes behind. I love you so. We are going to jump right in. You heard about the amazing panelists that I have here with us today, and we do not have enough time to talk about all their brilliance, but we're going to try to get as much as possible. So we're going to dive right in. So we have talked a few times today already about storytelling. Just so y'all know, the afternoon keynote from Afua Bruce touched a little bit on storytelling, but because there are probably folks here who weren't at that session, I wanted to start broad and just first with like, what makes good storytelling in the nonprofit sector and beyond? And when you think about storytelling using visual media like videos and graphics, what are sort of the key elements in the creative process for nonprofits? And Dmitry, will you start us off there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the other day I was watching a masterclass from Ken Burns, and he said, I'm bound by the same exact rules as Spielberg. The only difference is I can't make anything up. And so end of the day, we all know storytelling because we watch movies, we read books, and end of the storytelling is storytelling. Except when we do nonprofit storytelling, we're really doing it from the vantage point of real people that are going through a transformation. So some of the key elements is to, number one, think about your goal. Like, why am I telling this story? For a nonprofit, Is it to attract funding? Is it to let people know about our services? Like, there has to be a goal in mind, because once you have that goal, then you can check if the story is going to do that. Once you have the goal, when am I telling this story? Am I telling this for Giving Tuesday, or am I telling this at a gala? Because understanding when helps you contextualize your story, make it urgent, make it timely. It's much better to hear a story that's related to me right now rather than a story that's just kind of out there. So choosing your storytelling connected to the event. And also, are you telling your story on Instagram, or are you telling your story on a big TV? Like your event is going to be really different. So the kind of storytelling has to change. Knowing your audience, where are they? Who are they? Right. And knowing that what you're trying to do in storytelling, why storytell, is to create an emotional connection. I'm going to drop a link. There was a really cool article by Fast Company that talked about the difference between between fundraising on the web and fundraising on mobile, and it found that people on mobile are very selfish. And the only way, the same person on the web is less selfish than they are on mobile, and the only way that people were able to access giving was through storytelling. Right, so I just shared the article here. So in general, I think storytelling is about emotional engagement, and nonprofit storytelling for me, I like to use this concept called the Dorothy principle. Like, we all know the Wizard of Oz. So whose story is the Wizard of Oz? It's Dorothy's story, right? Dorothy is trying to get home, and she arrives in this place that's unknown, and the entire story is this transformation. But how does she get home? She takes these shoes and she clicks the shoes together and she gets home. Now, imagine Prada sponsored that story. How many times does Dorothy have to say, and I really love these Prada shoes, and I can't believe these Prada shoes got me home? Before you stop really paying attention to the story, you feel being sold to, you feel like it's disingenuous, right? So now imagine your nonprofit is the shoes. There has to be a natural story of how your beneficiary gets home, of how they transform. And the lion, all the scarecrow, those are all your staff. They're helping Dorothy, right? So for me, storytelling and nonprofit storytelling is the same. Try to figure out your goal and then focus on that hero's journey and that transformation, and imagine your nonprofit is the shoes. It has to be very clear how the impact happened, but don't focus on the shoes. And then you have an infinite amount of stories to tell, because there are an infinite amount of Dorothys that go through your transformation.
Okay. I love that visual. I love you walking us through a story that so many of us know to help sort of show or explain that to us, show it to us. And so I'm curious, Danny, I'm going to kick this next one to you. So with that kind of creative process in mind, or those goals in mind, like, where does AI come in? Like, how can AI simplify and enhance the creation of that compelling visual content to effectively communicate a nonprofit's mission or tell folks about the red shoes?
Sure. So I'd say I can actually practically help with just about every stage of the creative process. It can be starting as a starting as a brainstorming partner when you're working on a draft of a script for video, perhaps, or if it's more of a static asset, it could help you create things like slogans, call to actions, and copy. And finally, you can also use it to edit assets and edit images and make a lot of really time-consuming tasks that would normally be really difficult, so much simpler and easier. But Mallory, I really like your question about effectively communicating the nonprofit's mission, because I think that's actually really important. And it's also really, really important to give the AI context, if you're leveraging AI, about what your mission is. And also not just your mission, like what is your mission, but also what are the goals and objectives that you're hoping to achieve. What is the audience that you're looking to connect with? And I think it's much like briefing a creative. The more information you share and prompt, the better the output will be. After all, like every piece of content that you want to create, like every story that you want to tell, like there's a deeper purpose behind it, hopefully. Like you want it to be feeling a purpose, you want it to be aligned with that mission and building on top of your brand.
Okay, I love that. So you're like, what I hear you saying, tell me if I'm hearing this right, is that it's really about like pulling back before even just the thing that you're using AI for, whether it's to create an image around blank or edit an image, and really take that step back. And every time you're using a tool or doing a thing like that, to really remind yourself of like the purpose of all of those things, because that's going to sort of give some like heuristics almost to how you use the tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the way I think of it is, if you're telling a story, there's a storyteller, right? And it's not uncommon for there to be multiple storytellers, or maybe a team, or maybe a creative team that's jamming on it. And AI can be someone who enters the room and helps you with a lot of these things. But ultimately, like, you want to be telling your story. You don't want to just leave it up to AI to tell their story.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I could go down a rabbit hole there, and I'm gonna like pull my ADHD brain back from doing that, because we're here at the responsible, we're here at the Fundraising AI Summit, which is all about the responsible and beneficial use of AI. And so, Torin, I want to kick this one to you actually. How can nonprofits, so given the context of sort of what we've talked about so far, how can nonprofits ensure that they're using AI ethically and responsibly in their visual storytelling efforts? I love the way Danny was framing that up about really sort of starting with the goal, and sort of Dmitry around like the authenticity and focus on the story itself. But especially as we think about so many of these organizations are storytelling around sensitive topics, like how do you think about that sort of ethical and responsible use of these tools?
So thank you for having me. And I'd like to approach this in two different directions. So one is like sort of from the external view in, just to be transparent so that people aren't confused, especially if you're running a nonprofit where you're generating funds or trying to, or trying to, get a call for donations. Nobody wants to feel as though they were swindled in any way. So that would probably be like first and foremost, like if you end up generating imagery or use something like that, like a text to image, just being transparent about the source. But at the same time, like maybe internally when it comes to creating the work itself, sometimes using a text to image generation is actually can be as ethical as anything else. There's a nonprofit that I'm familiar with that's a home for women of domestic violence. And every year, they reach out to different ad agencies to have, people come in and do photo shoots, to try to generate funds, and it's all pro bono work. Well, one year they had reached out to a different ad agency, and they sent their team of photographers in, and they were all young men. And so naturally, the women who lived at this home were super uncomfortable with it. And here's an example where it's like, okay, speaking with the director, maybe instead of bringing in people from the outside, we can use AI to give a facsimile of that story in a way where nobody feels as though their actual physical safety is being threatened, or that they're having to expose themselves. And so you can turn their stories into an image using text to image. And so that's an example of, maybe this is the safer approach to putting out content that doesn't come at the detriment of the people who you're trying to actually serve. So being transparent to the audience, and then also there's a way to use AI very ethically for your, like on the internal side when it comes to creating the content itself.
Yes. Okay. I love that. And I think it really actually leads to the question I sort of wanted you, Dmitry, to maybe add on to this a little bit, which you also talked about, I think, on kind of the flip side in that first question around like, how do we maintain that like authenticity, especially when we're using AI generated visuals, right? Like, I feel like if we were having this conversation, a year ago, folks wouldn't even necessarily know what we were talking about. And now I think, and we've seen in some of the presentations today, like the massive difference sometimes in how quote unquote real that visual looks and feels and things like that, right? So authenticity, I think on the one hand, we can think about the types of visuals that AI spits out quickly with the words jumbled and it's very clear that it was AI generated, versus things that feel really real. And so I'm curious, like, how do you think about that piece of it?
And I love that question. So I think a lot of times we associate AI with generating something fresh. And I actually think about AI in a different way. I actually always want to start with the human story. And so, like, for instance, for us, we try to scale authentic storytelling. What so that happens is we take interviews by real people. And then we say, hey, the process of taking that person and sharing their story broadly is actually really complicated. It could take 50 to 100 hours. So how do we reduce that to minutes? Well, first, you can use AI to focus the human story. You said a lot of things. What is the main narrative thread that we want to focus in on, right? Take 30 minutes down to 3. Then we can use AI to transform the story. Now I have these 3 minutes. How can I turn that into clips? How can I turn that into quotes? How can I turn that into content, right? And then we use AI to reframe the story. So I'm telling the story for Giving Tuesday. Now I'm telling the story for my annual impact report. Now I'm telling this story as a part of a bigger story to demonstrate the transformation that we've had for a grant. That's the same story, but it's told differently. And AI is really, really good at taking your foundational information and reframing it. Another thing that, like a principle that we have in storytelling principle is show, not tell. So if you help, if you are a nonprofit that helps kids with disabilities compete in sports, don't tell me that you help kids with disabilities compete in sport. Tell me about Lucy, who won a national championship because of your donation of a wheelchair, right? So a lot of times we want to see these things in action. Other ways to keep authenticity is to make sure you understand your tone. And if you're a marketing person, you're like, oh, I have this doc that says my comms up, but you may not know that, but you do know what you wrote. So you can take something that you wrote, throw it into AI and say, describe my tone to me. And then you're like, I like that tone, or I don't like that tone. What's going on, right? And then a few kind of other things is understand the event that you're talking about and make sure that the story is framed for the event, that it feels authentic. Otherwise, if it just feels like a story that could have been told at any point, you kind of lose the authenticity, and that's where AI can transform. And lastly, good storytelling is good storytelling. So I'm gonna kind of throw this in the chat. We actually built a tool. We haven't released it broadly yet, but I'll give it out to the folks here, which actually lets you drop your story in, and it analyzes it across all the different storytelling rubrics and gives you an in-depth report from a dramaturgy perspective of what you need to do to tell that story and in the most authentic way. So storygrader.com, it's free to use, courtesy Arbor. Enjoy.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. And okay, I asked for the timer to be put on and now I really regret it. So I'm going to figure out how to ask all the questions that I want in the time that we have left. But Danny, I'd love to know from your perspective, like when you think about where does human involvement sort of matter the most in the storytelling process when AI is used, like especially when it comes to live videos and visual media, like what are the sort of moments where you're like, okay, that's a human function? I'd be curious, how you think about that. Is anybody else having trouble hearing him?
Sorry,
You're muted, sir.
I was on mute, but so this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I would actually perhaps say everywhere, but I'll give you a more specific answer later. But I think like throughout the entire process, be able to interject your own creativity, be able to interject your own emotions, your own human input and touch, like will carry through like in the content you create, and it'll be more engaging to your audience. But I think specifically, like at the very beginning, is where your input and your guidance is the most important, and it basically sets the stage for like the entire process. And the step the other most important step I'd say is probably at the very end when you're making final tweaks, polishes, and checking your work. And it's totally okay to just like totally redo a section because you have a different creative vision in mind, or you think you can do it better. I would definitely encourage having human involvement throughout the entire process, just because it creates better content.
Okay, I think that's a great answer, especially from the head of AI at Canva, because I think like so much of this is really about this nuanced intersection, right, of using these tools to help make things easier for us as nonprofit leaders, but not to be less human in our work. And so I really, really appreciate that answer. And this actually segues great into something, Torin, that I was wanting to ask you, which is, one of the things we talked about this with Seth Godin a little bit too, that I worry about in our sector is that a lot of our measurements of success are very transactional and are also very like short-sighted, right? It's like, how do we measure sort of the success of a story that we've told? And the measurements often that we use like are immediate, which maybe that's all you can ever measure with KPIs. But I'm curious, like we want to make sure that AI doesn't just help us do more bad fundraising faster, as Woodrow Rosenbaum always says. And so I'm curious from your vantage point, like if you are thinking about measuring the success of storytelling, what metrics or outcomes you might focus on beyond something like fundraising dollars in this context?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be all those things. Even with the KPIs, you could have the most robust report sent back to you, and it's not so much about what metrics are being delivered; it's what you infer from them. And even that's like an art in and of itself. Like if I am looking at like, oh well, stats are down month over month, like there might be a completely external reason for that, but on a chart by itself, it's like you can't really make an educated guess, if that makes any sense. And so not just like relying on metrics for how you like what your barometer for success might be. For me personally, it's always been like an internal sort of gratitude. It's like, did I enjoy the process of creating this? Even with generative AI, it's if I'm coming up with a bunch of variations, really, like I've thought a lot about this. It's like, is the art itself the output, or is it the process of making it? Like at what point is the artist removed? And at the end of the day, like it's all artifice, none of it's real. And so it's authentic. It's like the idea was mine. Like maybe I didn't manufacture it in a way that's traditional, but it's like if I'm just posting, nobody knows. And so like, where do I place the value there? And so if I'm coming up with 1,000 variations that AI created in an instant, well now, and I can only pick one, now the art is curative. It's like, what do I choose to put in front of you? And that says something about how I think and what my approach is. And so that's a skill in and of itself. Like you can put 1,000 pair of sneakers in front of my dad. He will pick the goofiest ones to wear no matter what. Like that's just not a skill that he has. But if, and it's the same with like generating work and using, one of the AI text to image engines, you still have to choose. You still have to have the vision. You still have to be the one to give it the idea. And so to answer your question about how, where to frame success, it's like, did it feel right to you? Did you put something out there that didn't feel right? Like regardless of the money, are you uncomfortable with this? Or was it the exact opposite? And you're like, wow, I loved making this. I loved what we put out there. That's like the sort of thing where I tend to lean. But there are times where it's like, okay, like we do actually have to raise some money though. So you'll have to balance that for yourselves.
Okay, I am obsessed with that answer. And anybody who follows my work is like, oh my gosh, Mallory planned that answer. And I did not. Because a lot of what I talk about in my book that came out today is around sort of discomfort and how do we lean into and interpret that discomfort and how do we check in with ourselves throughout the different processes. And so I love that you're talking about like, yeah, you can look at that external stuff, but also there are some really important like self-facing questions to tap into and not ignore and sort of push through as you're figuring out sort of what all this looks like in real time. Okay, so because we are a little bit short on time, Danny, I have a question that we cannot get off this call without me asking, because and then we'll do a little rapid fire, Dmitry and Torin, to help us close up. So I personally, and I know everybody at Fundraising AI, we really love Canva Shield, which is part of the way that Canva talks about data and privacy that is really unique and really sets a high and important bar. And since we're always talking about the responsible use of AI, I'd love for you to just tell everybody a little bit about that and what it is and why it matters.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So when we first started building AI at Canva, we had a lot of principles and thoughts. Like we saw that we had a really serious responsibility to build AI safely and ethically for our community as well as all of our stakeholders. So so we adopted a few principles like robust trust and safety, ensuring that creatives get paid royalties and also benefit from AI, and also not training AI on Canva users' private content without the explicit opt-in, not opt-out consent. So all of these form to become Canva Shield, and we think AI is really transformative and disruptive, but that also increases the bar of our responsibility for getting that right.
Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate the way y'all are, setting a great example there. I dropped the link to learn more about Canva Shield in the chat as well. Okay, Dmitry, I'm going to kick it to you, and then Torin, I'll let you wrap up with the same question, which is to just drop one rapid fire tip for nonprofits to keep in mind as they begin experimenting with AI and with storytelling. What's your sort of one big takeaway?
I think it's important to understand how AI plays into your decision-making process. If you come in asking a question and you're like, oh, that's a bad answer, you're not using AI appropriately. And I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan, and he has this episode where he says, be curious, not judgmental, right? And it's you look online, it's like, did Walt Whitman say that? It says not Walt Whitman. I'm not sure who said it. Maybe it was just Ted Lasso and his brilliant writers. But be curious, not judgmental. You get an answer. You don't like that answer. Why? Ask the AI to explain to you, why did it give that answer? Ask it to justify. In that justification, you're going to learn something, right? So a lot of times we'll just judge the answer, and whether we like it or not, we're jumping to a conclusion. But for me, really using AI is about mastering what good looks like and what bad looks like. And once you understand those parameters, I've asked a question, it gave me an awful answer. Then I said, why did you give this answer? It explains that actually use this context instead, and it became a phenomenal answer, right? Because what you don't know when you ask, really, it's like learning how to Google. You have to learn how to ask the right questions, right? So when you get a bad answer from AI, why did you get that answer? Inquire the thought process that the AI used, and then correct assumptions based on your expertise, your taste, and your aesthetic.
Ooh, okay. I'm really glad that you went there and dug into that. Thank you so much. Torin, what about you? What are some final words or a tip for nonprofits to keep in mind?
Yeah, so one, just piggybacking off of Danny and Dmitry, is just, I think everybody who's on the engineering side of AI is pretty universal in this sentiment, which is transparency. And that's not just with telling you where a work came from, but it's also like how to use the tools. So if you have a question, if you're using Adobe or Canva or anything else, like the people who work on this stuff love to help. Like we really are all passionate about that. So that's tip one. Tip two is don't have it replace the things that you already have. There's a nonprofit here in Rochester that does summer camp for at-risk youth in the city, and they're allowed to go to summer camp out in the suburbs. And all winter long, they have the hardest time generating funds. And then in the summer, everything ticks off. But the kids are already at camp. And the reason why is because they can post pictures of just the kids running around, having fun. And so suddenly as a donor, you're like, this is where my money goes to. Like you're seeing kids who would never have had the opportunity to just feel safe kicking the ball around in some grass. And so that's something that you can capture on your phone. But I think that sometimes with nonprofits, because there are so many hats having to be worn, the tendency is to want to automate everything. There are so many things that are organic that you can just do as a one-off that are way more effective than you might think that you should give a chance. But yeah, those would be my two tips.
Oh my gosh, you guys, so much wisdom in 25 minutes. Can we show these guys some love in the chat, please? I would like to see all the GIFs or GIFs. I still have not figured it out. It is the end of the day, and I said I would figure it out today. I have not. But can you drop the emojis, the pictures, whatever it is, show these guys some love. Y'all have dropped some serious major wisdom for folks as they go in and start to dig into their stories. I love how you centered humans in everything while continuing to talk about the way tech enables us to build compelling stories, connect emotionally, using the right tools, but also using who we are, and keeping that at the center of all this. So thank you guys so much. Kashana, I'm going to get out of your way. By the way, girl, you're allowed to do whatever you want. You want to make up a giveaway? It's yours. So this is your room. Have some fun.
I love it. Listen, I couldn't agree with you more. This conversation was just really dope. And I think that people hearing from folks who work on our corporate counterparts say, like, just ask, like, I think that's one of the biggest things, because we get caught in this cycle of, oh my gosh, the big bad, or oh my gosh, them who we can't talk to, as opposed to, like, we're humans. And if you don't reach into somebody's DM with some skeevy mess and you're actually trying to, like, build a relationship, ask a truly curious question, actually engage and pull it out of that transactional, that transaction into that relation, listen, there's nothing I'm not going to answer. So I know that the five of us kind of feel the same. So it was really good to hear that. And I know for me, each of the ways in which you've talked about some of these tools have really helped to shape me. Both, it allows my creative, because my mind, I can draw, I can paint, I can take photography. I am at the top of the class. In real life, I can't cut straight. So these tools have allowed me over the course of my career to really be the artiste I was meant to be, and appreciate you all just kind of bringing life to that. So thank y'all. Okay, so we had a couple of questions. If y'all got to jump. So feel free to jump if you got to jump. And let's see. I have one that got a bunch of upvotes. So any tips for helping with storytelling when a lot of our stories can't be shared? Mental health org here. Many individuals do not want to share their journey or story. So any tips for that? Where do folks start?
I mean, first off, my wife is a therapist, and there's a lot of stories that I hear with fake names, and they're just as impactful. I think sometimes we get caught up in the idea that the storyteller has to be the person who goes through the story, and that's not true. You can tell the story on behalf of somebody. Most of the stories we heard when we were growing up were not told by the people that experienced. They're told by our grandparents, right?
That's right.
And we remember that. That's amazing, right? So storytelling does not have to be first person to be impactful.
Ooh, come on. I love that. And I think for organizations who worry about, like, poverty porn or exploitation or things of that nature, you can take a step back from the gritty of the story to say, what would people need to know here and understand to walk away from this going, I got to do something.
Yeah.
That's where that lives.
Like the whole, like, the problem is what your focus of the story is, not who says it. Sorry, go ahead.
This is the word. All right, my friends, I want to thank each of you for your time, for your expertise, just for the openness you brought to this conversation. I can't wait to meet each of you in real life. And in the meantime, keep doing the fantastic work you are doing. And each of you are a gift. And so thank you for letting us unwrap just a little bit today.